computer. Hi, everybody. This is Addison Shonland. It is July the 26th, and I've got Team Saran, Nitin Saran and Vineet Longani, to talk about the goings on in India. And just before we started the recording, we made the joke that for the first time, we're not going to be talking about COVID. But of course, if it wouldn't be aviation, there would be no problem. But there's a problem, so it obviously impacts the aviation. So for our little agenda today, let's start off with the war in Ukraine, Mr. Putin's special operation, but the rest of the planet calls it really what it is. It's impacting, obviously, higher fuel prices. And gentlemen, explain to us how India has a special relationship with Russia, which we mentioned on a previous conversation. And of course, outside of India, and for those of us whose idea of a special relationship with Russia is one of vitriolic conversation, maybe you can walk us through the view from India on the oil prices and everything else that's going on, how the Ukraine crisis is impacting.
Well, I think just to start, it's a strange topic for us in a strange political way. While everyone's on the same plane that war is just unacceptable in this day and age, you go back into the history of our politics and our international relations, and you don't dig too far back, and you realize that for a very long time we really had only one ally. So it's a bit of a conundrum from that perspective as to what do you do with the past relationships that we've had. And it brings up a lot of interesting political as well as diplomatic, both aviation related questions as to is the stance that India had taken, is it correct? Should we be worried about ourselves rather than others? Do we look at the fact that how Ukraine has voted for or against us? So it's opened up a whole Pandora's box of different issues. As far as aviation goes, it has been one of the most devastating incidents in modern history, I would say, as far as aircraft finance goes. In as much as over 100 aircraft, over a couple of hundred aircraft being stranded there and lessors being unable to repossess them. So those are the small issues that come to mind, and it's been an eye-opener for all. I think it's a very interesting thing indeed. Unfortunate and yet interesting.
Yeah, and if I was to just sort of bring in like an industry perspective as to how it's impacted our airlines, really. I mean, of course, the price of fuel has gone up tremendously, and which has been across the board throughout the world. How it impacts our airlines more is because our airlines are probably the most taxed airlines in the world. So when the price of oil goes up, it becomes extremely difficult for our airlines to even break in. I mean, you see, we have two strong quarters in a year. I mean, our first quarter starts in April, unlike I think in the US where your first quarter starts in Jan. So we've got two great quarters when people travel, which is summer holidays and Christmas, New Year, and Diwali. And then there are 2 quarters where people don't really travel because there aren't any holidays or festivals, or very few of them. So as it stands, we're in the weak quarter, which is quarter 2, and our airlines are struggling. Demand for travel has dropped significantly, and part of that is because of high fares. So airlines are being forced to obviously charge a lot more than what they used to, and also sort of are unable to discount. You see, it's a strange conundrum for them, not really a strange one, because, when you speak to people who run airlines, they're like, if we're not able to sort of at least make for the operating cost of that flight, we would rather park the aircraft and not have a flight at all. So you see, there's an interesting trend where on weekends we have a decent number of capacity put in, especially by low-cost airlines. And on the weekdays when there is little traffic, they tend to cancel flights or club them. And this is done well in advance. So, the idea is not to really impact people sort of last minute. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a difficult quarter, especially for airlines that aren't well capitalized. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see how what way does this whole impact on oil really goes?
A side note really to the oil thing. There are rumbles that we hear that India might support Russia's fleet, the stolen fleet that you alluded to, with spares. Is that true?
Well, we've been asked this question a number of times, and I don't think it's would be very accurate for a number of reasons. Number one, India would possibly not do that publicly. I think that would be a very silly move, for the main reason that all the lessors that are suffering in Russia currently are all the lessors who lease aircraft to us. So we must be very, very careful, and this is something our authorities are well aware of, that you can't look at the world in isolation anymore. You rock the boat in one part of the world, it sends ripples all over. So that is very difficult. And secondly, the other reason why I think it'll be difficult for us to provide spares would be is just the bureaucracy in our country. Getting, exporting items and importing items is just such a task that, even if we really wanted to under the carpet sort of support the airlines, it would be very difficult for anyone to do that. But what we have seen is a lot of interest in Russian manufacturers or persons who own aircraft, Russian built aircraft, showing a lot of interest in, selling to India, or, coming and establishing, some sort of business where they could use those aircraft. I personally have dealt with 2 or 3 of such, people who are interested in coming and using Russian built aircraft. Of course, the response has been very lukewarm, and it's just not a feasible proposition. But that's what people are definitely exploring, those avenues.
And more importantly, you see, sorry to interject, while the world sort of has put us in a bit of a spot to say that, oh, you have this relationship with Russia. I mean, as it stands, Europe's buying all that oil and gas from Russia. And yes, they're trying to sort of reduce their reliance on gas and petroleum products from Russia. But that's only going to taper down over the next couple of years. So you see, when you compare all of that to the amount of business that we do with Russia, it's a very small percentage of it. You see, I mean, it's like, it might be apples and oranges, but it's nice to sort of just maybe put a perspective to it and say, well, we're not buying like crazy sums of oil from Russia. And strangely, and I may be wrong, you see, what this whole situation has done is countries in the West that rely on oil or gas from Russia are having to go to other producers in the world. Now we buy from the same producers, which probably may be countries in the Gulf, for example. And what that does is, in a strange sort of way, people who weren't buying from the Gulf countries are now buying from the Gulf countries, which sort of puts an impact on someone like us, because prices there may go up because of increased interest and demand. So then we have little choice but to sort of go back to Russia and say, listen, they can't buy from you. If you're willing to sell to us, we'd buy off you, because at the end of the day, we've got to do what's in our best interest. You see what I mean? So it's a strange sort of situation, and I don't really know what's right and what's ethical and what's wrong and where one draws a line. But overall, like Nitin said, I mean, war is not a good thing. And, it's just something that even India, for that matter, has said that we would want, we don't support war, and, parties concerned should sit and talk.
Right. Yeah, it's where we sit in the United States. It's pretty much a black and white situation. There's not much gray, although there are, shall we say, some strange people in Congress who have strange views on the world. But then they had strange views anyway. One of the things that sort of we can back into the idea of this leasing thing you mentioned, Nitin, the revised draft to the Protection and Enforcement of Interest in Aircraft Objects Bill 2022. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to us what that's all about, please?
Well, that's essentially, so before a law is made, it goes through the stage of being a bill and being passed through both houses of Parliament. So this is really a law to enact the Cape Town Convention, which by and large makes credit cheaper for airlines because it sets up a regime where a person can get their aircraft back should there be any default. So that's, I've explained in one line what, the Cape Town Convention is, but you can write a PhD topic on the whole thing. This is our third attempt to have this act passed by Parliament. And there's a big push by the Aviation Working Group, by a number of lessors, a number of law firms in India to get this through, because we have had our ups and downs ever since Kingfisher, and those problems still exist with Indian airlines. If you try and repossess an aircraft today, you will get stuck. You cannot unilaterally export an aircraft from India. So it's surprising for this day and age, for 2022, that we are still stuck where we were in 2012. But we've made small advances, but this bill, if it becomes a law, will be the biggest advance yet. So all fingers are crossed.
Does it address local financing in any way, or does it enable local financing?
It does, because it does deal with local transactions. But then that's one of the aspects which the government has seen very closely, whether they would want local transactions to be covered by it or not. So that's really in the final bill that is tabled before Parliament. We'll see what happens. The current draft does include it.
Okay, that's obviously a big thing for India. Now, since we've last spoken, Jet Airways, the Phoenix is rising, I guess, and now Akasa. Interesting stuff going on there.
Well,
exactly.
Who wants to talk about which one?
I think we should start with Jet Airways, the older one. You see, they've got a lot of positive press in the last couple of months. People have been waiting with bated breath to see what fleet they order. There's been a lot of conjecture. There've been a lot of reports that have come out which have turned out to be false, because no orders have been made. Farnborough went by, no orders were made. So that's it's anyone's guess. And let's bear in mind that the proceedings by which Jet Airways was considered insolvent, which was restructured, and now which has to be handed over to the new owners, those proceedings are still going on. So until it gets the final stamp of the court, which I see no reason why it shouldn't happen, it will not go back to being Jet Airways the way it was. Is that expected? Yes, it is. But as a lawyer, I'm trying not to be a pessimist. It just needs the final seal of the court, and that's what we should really be focusing on. Let the new management do whatever they're doing in the background to make sure that they get a running start when they get that green signal.
So just to be clear, they're not flying.
They have got their air operator certificate, but they are not flying.
And they've rehired some of their people. I mean, what do they need to do? What needs to happen for the go switch to be pressed?
Well, you see, technically they're still in limbo. Technically, the new management who's come into place, they still have to be handed over. Officially, they have to be handed over the airline by the court. So the airline is still technically in insolvency, but it just needs that final tick or the final stamp by the court saying, here, we officially hand over, possession of the airline from all the committee of the creditors, etc., to the new management. So that very critical step is awaited, and I'm sure the new management is also waiting very, very closely for that step, because that's when they can really become efficient and effective in getting the airline off the ground.
How long do you think that would take?
I would not know. I believe the court hearing is scheduled for next week. So let's see what happens.
It could be weeks, not necessarily months.
Well, it could also be decided next week. It could be as soon as next week. It could be as late as a couple of months. So that's anyone's guess. It's in the hands of the Honorable Court.
Right. Okay. Akasa and the MAX, I noticed.
Yes, it's a big win for Boeing, because they managed to get a brand new customer in India for the MAX. It's a deal made in heaven, in the sense that, Akasa got a great deal. The first Well, I'm told at least the first 18 aircraft are whitetails, which obviously were supposed to go to other airlines, and they're taking them, well, in quick succession. The second one just arrived today. The airline starts commercial operations on the 7th of August. I will be on the inaugural flight, along with a whole bunch of other aviation enthusiasts in India. So it's going to be one big party for all of us. So very many firsts on that. I've never been on a MAX. Obviously, first flight with Akasa. Never been to Ahmedabad in my life. So the first flight's from Bombay to Ahmedabad. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So yeah, I mean, it seems like they got a great deal from Boeing, and Boeing's done well because they've got a brand new airline in India. But you see, the challenge lies in how do you get this airline a running start in an environment where, I mean, apart from the fuel prices and everything, you see, there is a complete dearth of slots at least all our metro airports, which are tier 1 airports where all the key population centers are, be it Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Chennai. Well, so these are some of you. It's impossible to get a slot between 7 and 9 a.m. in the morning, which is when you'd want to get your aircraft away, and between similar times in the evening. So, yes, it's great. They're a low-cost airline. They could have like a 5 a.m. start, which is what AirAsia India did when they came in. There was a dearth of slots, and they said, well, we just start early. And they're a low-cost airline, so it's not too much of an issue. But that's exactly what Akasa is going to have to do, because finding slots is going to be an issue. You see, their first flight departs Bombay at 10 a.m. in the morning. So, and the aircraft does a couple of these and comes back to Bombay at about 6 in the evening, and then is just parked after that. So I'm sure they'll add to their schedule, but it's really tricky from a network standpoint as to where they'll go and how do they really compete, because, well, they're too small. So you won't really you stand a chance to any of the other airlines, well, leave alone Indigo, which has got almost 300 aircraft. So India is a difficult place to do business on a good day. When your largest competitor is close to having 300 aircraft and can basically kill you on any route that you intend to operate with multiple frequencies that they already have, it's very interesting. But anyway, I mean, I'm an optimist, and I still feel we're a large country, and a lot more people would want to fly. So we are the land of opportunity. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
A bit of the Wild West too.
And even to add that,
actually, I'm sorry, Russia's going to take that title, so it's not really us.
Okay.
Especially after what's happened in the last 6 months. Yeah, from an aircraft sort of leasing and finance standpoint, right? I mean, who would have thought that someone will just like take over these aircraft? I mean, when it happened, Nitin and I were like, what is this? I mean, it's just complete. It's just respect for law, like international law, which is crazy. But then I guess it is what it is.
So, Nitin, you wanted to say something?
No, I think even from the legal perspective, which concerns us the most, I think we're very excited about both Jet and Akasa bringing in a lot more aircraft, which means a lot of new transactions for the legal folks. It means a lot of new transactions for everyone, and I think it's definitely going to ruffle some feathers. And overall, it's a positive move.
I think for the Indian consumer, the fact that you have a new airline that's going to come in, and it's going to obviously find creative ways to attract to its brand. We have the same thing going on right now in the US with Breeze. How do you? Why would you fly Breeze? Well, turns out they've really focused on the word nice, and their service and their approach is completely different. And what we find anecdotally is they're tiny, but the people that have flown them once are very keen on doing it again. And so in the midst of what as you described, Vinny, this behemoth airline called Indigo, the problem with a big airline like this, they're not nimble. And Akasa is tiny, and for them to be creative, the cost of being creative might not be that high, but they can actually, as I think one of you said, ruffle feathers. So it's fascinating. And of course, who doesn't want to cheer for for the small guy, for the underdog? Everybody cheers for the underdog.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And competition brings out the best in everyone. So I think it can only be a positive. Even the big guy who's not nimble will always come out, there'll always be some positive that comes out of it.
Now, speaking about not nimble, on our agenda today, Air India, the big mama, well, maybe the big Raj in your world, not known for being nimble. Now, Nitin, you spoke about Farnborough. Obviously, there were a lot of expectations for India orders, and none were forthcoming. Any thoughts on why none were forthcoming? And then let's talk about Air India more formally, shall we say?
Well, I feel the simplest answer to why is because no decision's been taken or negotiations are still on. I think that's the simplest answer. And I think to a large extent, us aviation geeks, we understand aviation a bit too well, and we have possibly at times have a lot of expectations. But if you look at it from a commercial perspective, announcing at air shows is just a very small thing. So there are obviously larger matters which are being taken care of. Again, this is all conjecture. We don't know at what stage they are at, talking and who they're talking to. So it's simply a matter of them not having reached a final, agreement yet. No handshake at the moment. And again, this is only conjecture, and that would be my guess. And
it's interesting you said you used words that were right out of the Airbus playbook. Air shows are a small thing. It's exactly the language they use in an email to me when I said, "What's happening here?"
I mean, do bear in mind that we have an Indian air show now, and they may, for all practical purposes,
that's a good point.
We may be interested in doing it at our own air show. I mean,
right.
Why go to Dubai or Farnborough or anywhere else?
No, I think that's actually a very good point. I did see that Air India had appointed a chief pilot for the A350 fleet, which is, I mean, how much more of a signal do you need? Right?
Oh, absolutely. And we've had people reporting that the first A350 has also reached India. So there's all sorts of conjecture flying around.
It's a stealth model. So, you haven't heard about.
So while we're still looking for that A350, which we have, special investigators all over the country, all signs are definitely towards the 350. But sorry, Vin, go ahead.
Yeah, you see, in my opinion, Air India now is in safe hands, in the sense they're now owned by a group that has got fantastic reputation globally. They've been running 2 airlines in India. Have they done a good job or not? Irrespective of that, they have relationships with, well, obviously lessors who lease to them, and just otherwise with OEMs. Well, both airlines that they run have relationships with Airbus and Boeing both. So you see, they've got great credit, and they've got the wherewithal to turn around something like Air India. Now, will the order happen today, tomorrow, 6 months later, 1 year later? In my opinion, it is imminent. Because in order to change Air India, you really need to sort of start from scratch. And a lot of that look at from the human resource front, for example, they're offering voluntary retirement to all the old people. Air India is on this massive recruitment drive to recruit thousands of frontline staff. So they've already set the ball rolling, and that needs to be done in more ways than one. So Again, like I said, I see a world-class airline in Air India, not that there aren't one already, but, I'm talking about standards. I mean, like people hold the Singapore Airlines and the Emirates and Qatars of the world in great regard. I see Air India right up there, because apart from the fact that, they have the wherewithal to turn this around, this is their legacy. So, I mean, J.R.D. Tata started the airline. He is the father of Indian aviation. It's the best gift the current Tata management could give to themselves and their legacy. So it's going to happen anytime now. For all you know, we end this call and we wake up tomorrow morning and it's out there. But yeah, it will happen, and I'm very very positive about it and very hopeful.
So it's interesting, everybody in the commercial aviation space, let's say the lessors and the airlines specifically, are focused on this thing called net zero, which personally I think is a fantasy. And all the people making these promises, none of them will be held to these promises, because they'll all be retired or have moved on in beyond life by the time we get to 20, 30 or 50, whatever. But the quickest way for an operator to get to vastly lowered better rated ESG, lower emissions, is state-of-the-art engines. And Air India is clearly not operating enough state-of-the-art anything. 787s, they've got a bunch of them. Yes, I think they've got some Neos, but on the whole, that fleet needs a big refresh. And so that would be just in pure, pure money sense, operating costs, that is highly necessary for their operations. But I think, as you point out, the new owners of the airline are about as bankable as you can get.
They're as bankable as you get, and they do things with style. I mean,
Right.
They are not worried about making announcements. They are not concerned about, coming out and showing off or portraying the way they do. They run some of the most luxurious hotels in the world, and, they're not running around flying their own flag. So it is done in total typical Tata style, which is appreciated. And whatever they come out will be very good.
I think Nitin, that's the thing for all of us who are waiting for this, is we've seen what they did with Vistara.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that, and it's an impressive debut for the company to come back into the aviation sector, and it's like they haven't lost their touch.
Exactly. Yeah. It's you see, all these questions are still open. The biggest question is what happens to Vistara. You see, that's that's the biggest question. What happens to Singapore Airlines? What happens to that partnership over there? So more than what the fleet is going to be, I'm very interested to see where they end up. Will Singapore buy a larger chunk in the current Air India, which the Tatas have taken over? Anything is possible. So
Right.
That's what makes this space so interesting.
Right. I think for the thing that I'm most intrigued by was the hot rumor that Boeing had managed to persuade the Air India people to consider the MAX for the single aisle. And you can imagine they've committed to Neo already. That would be a huge turnover of a customer.
Well, Air India Express operates a 737 fleet. So they are now 100% owned by the Tatas. So you see, they're an airline which operates largely to the Gulf from down south, and they have a 737 fleet. So you see, and with AirAsia India, I mean, the majority stake in AirAsia India, owned by the Tata Group, is now owned by Air India. That's gone through. There's a 16.33% stake which AirAsia Group owns, which is to be bought imminently by the Tatas. And in my opinion, Air India Express and AirAsia India will sort of make one sort of large low-cost airline. So you see, they operate a 737 fleet. One of their airlines, well, I think it's 23 or 24 aircraft that Air India Express operates. And I mean, globally, every large airline splits orders between two OEMs. Right. Why would you want to place your eggs in one basket? Emirates has got the 380 and the 777. So I see no reason why their low-cost airline in India can have a MAX fleet and Air India mainline can have an Airbus fleet. You see what I mean? I mean, if you were that way, all wide-body aircraft currently owned by Air India are Boeing aircraft. They don't have Airbus wide-body aircraft at all. I mean, to be honest, no Indian airline has a wide-body Airbus aircraft as it stands. It's all Boeing. I mean, unless you count the 3 A330s which Jet has. I mean, 2 of them aren't really airworthy. Right. And I mean, like, one's gone off to, well, Air Serbia and it's not operating for them. And that's another long story. But you see, anything can happen. And I wouldn't be surprised if they split it between the two OEMs, because that's how they probably get the best deal.
I think that makes sense and probably is the way it works out, because you have a behemoth airline.
Yeah.
Which means that
Yeah, exactly.
and I mean, there's no way Air India gets rid of its 787 fleet. That's way new and high.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
very effective.
Well,
anything's
let's just,
possible.
I think currently it's a buyer's market right now. You know, whether you're talking
Yeah.
about old generation aircraft, whether you're talking about the MAX, which Boeing will push very hard to sell at competitive prices, it is a buyer's market right now. So it's possibly the best time for all of these guys to be going around and shopping and you know, making the OEMs come to their door and you know.
I'm just gonna throw.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just throw a little bomb out there. If all this had happened 10 years ago, you know what? I would see Air India flying 380s.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, you see, the world is the
Years ago.
oyster. Yeah, no, even now. I mean, you see, why do we look back? I mean, even if you look 5 years ahead, you see geographically where their largest hub, Delhi, is based, which is where Air India hubs out of. If you look at the Great Circle route, if you're flying from Europe into Australia or Southeast Asia, you literally fly over Delhi. I mean, there are airspace restrictions and all, but not for Air India. Air India is still using the Russian airspace, right? So it hasn't really impacted any of its operations to Europe and North America or wherever. I mean, and going forward also, you see, in my opinion, phase one is to fix the airline, fix the network, fix the product. Phase two is get brand new aircraft and go after traffic, which rightfully belongs to us and has been taken away by the Gulf Airlines. And I'm not saying they've done anything wrong. It's all legal. There are bilaterals in place. If you have a great product, you have every reason, and people have a choice and people fly via the Gulf. However, if an Indian airline has a similar competitive product, why would you not fly nonstop from India? Why would you take that detour to fly via Dubai or Abu Dhabi or wherever? And you see, people talk of a recession. We'll still be growing as a country at 3, 4, 5% in a recession. In good times, we grew at 9%. So the traffic continues to grow, and there is an opportunity here. So I see in the 5 years from now.
And to add to that, and to add to the enthusiasm, I agree with everything Vin is saying. But we also, I hope someone, you know, on the government level is listening to us, because we need to push our airlines to be world players.
Right.
See, what's happening right now is our own airlines are bickering amongst themselves. We are competing amongst ourselves. We should really be looking at the world as, you know, our competitors rather than ourselves. We really, really need to, you know, push this. You know, that's the advantage Singapore Airlines had with the government of Singapore. That's the advantage, you know, all the Middle Eastern carriers have with their governments. The governments are literally, I mean, they're the blue-eyed boys saying, go do whatever you're doing and do it to the best possible way. And that's the kind of idea, and that's the kind of push we need from our government. Otherwise, we'll never reach that level, because we'll always, you know, be pulling each other's pants down, trying to say, oh, you gave him this or you gave that person that. And that's just not conducive to have a very successful industry.
Nitin, that was a very strange word picture you gave me.
It's true. It's I can't put it any other way. I can't put it.
I think you can. You're a very smart lawyer, but it's funny. Gentlemen, that's a great conversation, and it's so nice to talk about exciting, upbeat stuff. Really fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to our follow-up in the next month or so. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.